I wasn't expecting much when I took the job as Santa's helper. It wasn't glamorous, but I needed the money. Christmas was around the corner, and bills don't wait for holiday cheer. The posting was simple. Help wanted. Santa's workshop. Season only. Good pay. Good pay is all I saw. The workshop was tucked away in the center of the mall, surrounded by oversized candy canes and a plastic snowman that had seen better days. When I arrived for my first day, the festive decorations seemed overdone. The kind of overdone that doesn't feel warm or welcoming, just a little too much. Maybe it was the way the lights flickered, as if struggling to stay bright, or the faint hum of the Christmas music loop that played endlessly. It sounded normal, but it had this weird echo, like it was coming from somewhere far away. I wasn't there to make friends or to enjoy the holiday spirit. I needed the cash. I'd lost my regular job just a few weeks earlier, and temp work was the only thing keeping me afloat. The ad promised long hours and decent pay. Exactly what I needed. When I first met the staff, everyone seemed nice. Maybe too nice. There was Holly, the woman who managed the place. She had a constant, wide smile that didn't quite match her tired eyes. Her voice was sweet, almost rehearsed, like she was reciting a script she'd said 100 times before. Then there was Joe, the guy who'd been doing this job for years. He was older, gruff, and didn't say much unless you asked him a direct question. Even then, his answers were clipped, like he didn't want to get too involved. "Been here long?" I asked him during the orientation. "Long enough," he said, not even looking at me. Then he walked away like I wasn't worth his time. The workshop itself was as festive as you'd expect. A giant chair for Santa, wrapped presents stacked high around it, and a carpet that looked like fake snow. But there was this faint smell. Not bad exactly, just odd, like cinnamon mixed with something metallic. I thought it might just be the heaters struggling against the winter chill outside. The kids came in droves, dragged by excited parents for their yearly photo with Santa. Holly explained how everything worked. Check the schedule, keep the line moving, and don't let the kids get too close to the gift pile. She didn't explain why. "Trust me, it's just better that way," she said with that too wide smile. That was the first time I felt it, that tiny knot of discomfort in my stomach, like something wasn't quite right. But I ignored it. Everyone knows mall jobs can be weird. Santa arrived an hour later. He didn't say much, just nodded at me as Holly introduced us. His suit was immaculate, the red velvet brighter than any I'd seen before. But it was his eyes that stood out. They were sharp, almost too focused for someone playing a cheerful old man. "Nice to meet you," I said, trying to sound friendly. "Likewise," he replied, his voice low and smooth, but his gaze lingered a little too long, like he was sizing me up. The first shift went by without much trouble, but there were little things I couldn't shake. The way Holly kept looking at the clock, her smile twitching every time it hit a specific hour. The way Joe muttered under his breath while stacking the fake presents. And then there was the kid, a boy maybe 7 or 8 years old, who screamed as soon as Santa reached for him. His mom apologized profusely, blaming a fear of strangers, but the way the boy looked at Santa, it wasn't fear. It was something deeper, something primal. As I left that night, I tried to shake off the strange feeling. It was just a mall job, I told myself. Nothing more. The lights were dimming as the mall closed, but I couldn't help but glance back at the workshop one last time. Santa's chair was still there, empty now, but it almost seemed like something was sitting in it, watching. I told myself it was just my imagination and walked away. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd already made a mistake by taking this job. When I came in the next day, Holly was waiting for me at the entrance, clipboard in hand, her usual smile plastered on her face. "Glad you're back," she said, her voice sugary as always. "Let's go over a few things before we start." okay? She led me to the back of the workshop, past the towering fake gifts and the oversized candy canes, to a small break room tucked out of sight. The room felt colder than the rest of the place, like the heat didn't quite reach it. On the wall was a laminated list of rules written in bold, red letters. "All right," Holly said, tapping the list. "These are important. You'll want to follow them carefully." I scanned the list, expecting the usual stuff. Don't be late, keep your uniform clean, smile for the kids. But these rules, they were different. The Santa suit must never touch the floor. Ever. Do not move or touch the presents unless instructed. If a child starts crying, do not comfort them. Let their parents handle it. Do not stay in the workshop after closing hours. I frowned, pointing at the last one. What's with the after-hours rule? What happens if I stick around? Holly's smile faltered, just for a second, before snapping back into place. It's just for safety reasons. You know, the mall can get a little weird at night. She moved on quickly, brushing past my question like it wasn't worth answering. The shift started smoothly enough. Santa arrived right on time, and the line of families stretched out of sight. Holly's rules were in the back of my mind, but I didn't think much of them until the first incident. It was around mid-afternoon when one of the kids, a little girl in a sparkly red dress, tripped on her way up to Santa's chair. She wasn't hurt, just startled, and her mom rushed to pick her up. But the thing that caught my attention wasn't her fall. It was Santa's reaction. The moment the girl's hand brushed against one of the presents by the chair, Santa stiffened. His cheerful ho 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 stopped mid-laugh, and his gaze snapped down to her like a hawk spotting prey. "Please," he said sharply, his voice lower and colder than I'd ever heard it. "Keep her away from the gifts." The mom froze, muttered an apology, and pulled her daughter back. Santa's smile returned just as quickly as it had vanished, but my stomach churned. At the next break, I cornered Joe, the older guy who worked the shifts with us. He was in the back, sipping coffee like nothing unusual had happened. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice low. "What's the deal with the presents?" Santa nearly bit that kid's head off over one. Joe glanced at me, his expression unreadable. "You're better off not asking questions." "That's not an answer," I pressed. He sighed, setting his coffee down. "Look, just follow the rules. They're there for a reason. Holly doesn't put that list up for fun." I opened my mouth to argue, but he cut me off with a sharp look. "I'm serious. Don't push it." As the day wore on, the rules started to feel less like guidelines and more like laws. Holly would patrol the floor, her eyes darting between us and the kids like a hawk. Anytime someone got too close to the gifts or lingered near the chair, she'd step in with her saccharine voice. "Let's keep things moving, folks," she'd chirp, her smile never slipping. But there was an edge to her tone, something almost desperate. That night, as we were cleaning up, I accidentally knocked over one of the smaller presents near the chair. It was light, almost hollow, and made the faintest rustling sound as it hit the floor. Holly was on me in seconds, her smile gone for the first time. "Pick it up," she hissed, her voice sharp and urgent. I did as I was told, but I couldn't resist asking, "What's the big deal?" "It's just a box." She didn't answer. She just stared at me for a moment, her eyes wide and unblinking, before snatching the box from my hands and placing it carefully back in its spot. "Go home," she said finally, her voice flat. "We're done for the night." As I walked out of the mall, the rules replayed in my head. Don't touch the presents. Don't stay after hours. Don't ask questions. They weren't just rules, they were warnings. And for the first time, I started to wonder if I should have taken them more seriously. That night, I couldn't sleep. The rules, the way Holly and Joe acted, and Santa's icy tone. All of it stuck in my head like a splinter I couldn't pull out. I told myself I was overthinking it. Maybe it was just the stress of a new job, the weirdness of the holidays, or the endless Christmas music that had probably fried my brain. But the next day, things got stranger. I showed up early, hoping to shake off the unease by getting a head start on my duties. The mall was quiet, its halls dimly lit before opening hours. As I walked toward the workshop, I noticed something odd. The door was already open. That wasn't supposed to happen. Holly was always the first one there, unlocking the doors and going over the day's schedule. But when I stepped inside, the place was empty. No Holly, no Joe, no Santa, just the workshop eerily quiet. The smell hit me first. That same metallic tang I'd noticed before, only stronger now. It hung in the air like a bad memory, mixing with the faint scent of pine and fake snow. The Christmas lights were on, but they flickered faintly, casting jittery shadows on the walls. "Hello," I called out, my voice bouncing off the walls. No answer. I hesitated by Santa's chair, the centerpiece of the workshop. Something about it felt different, like it had shifted slightly even though it was bolted to the floor. The presents around it were neatly stacked, just as we'd left them the night before. But one of the boxes had a tear in the wrapping paper. It wasn't much, just a small rip near the corner. But when I crouched down to look closer, I thought I saw something move inside. I jerked back, heart racing, but there was nothing. Just the torn paper, swaying slightly as if stirred by a breeze. Except there wasn't any breeze. I was still staring at the box when Holly appeared behind me. "You're early," she said, her voice tight and clipped. I jumped, nearly knocking over the stack of presents. The door was open. I thought, "You thought what?" She snapped, cutting me off. Her smile was gone, replaced by something harder, almost angry. I gestured to the torn box. "This wasn't like this yesterday. It's fine," she interrupted, her tone sharp. "I'll take care of it. Just focus on your job. Okay?" Her sudden shift in demeanor left me off balance. She wasn't the cheerful, overly sweet manager I'd met on my first day. She was tense, almost scared. The day dragged on, but the unease lingered. Kids came and went, parents snapped their photos, and Santa played his part perfectly. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. At one point, I thought I heard a faint tapping sound coming from behind the workshop. It was soft, almost rhythmic, like someone drumming their fingers against a wall. I glanced around, but no one else seemed to notice. "Hey, did you hear that?" I asked Joe during our break. "Hear what?" he replied, not looking up from his coffee. "The tapping," I said. "It's coming from the back." Joe paused, his jaw tightening ever so slightly. "You're imagining things," he said finally, his voice flat. But the way he avoided my eyes told me he was lying. Later that evening, as the mall was closing, I lingered in the workshop, finishing up some cleaning. Holly and Joe had already left, and Santa was nowhere to be seen. The place felt heavier somehow, like the air itself was thicker. The Christmas lights flickered more frequently now, casting strange, dancing shadows on the walls. I was just about to leave when I noticed the back door, the one Holly had strictly told us to stay away from, was ajar. It wasn't wide open, just cracked enough for a sliver of light to spill through. I froze, debating whether to investigate or just leave. But curiosity got the better of me. The closer I got, the stronger that metallic smell became. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I pushed the door open slowly, half expecting to see Holly or Joe on the other side. But the room was empty. It wasn't very large, just a small storage space with shelves lined with more presents. But these weren't the same colorful, cheerful boxes we used out front. These were plain, brown paper tied with string, and they didn't look like props. They looked real. One of the boxes was slightly open, the lid askew. Inside, I caught a glimpse of something shiny and red. First, I thought it was wrapping paper, but then it twitched. I stumbled back, nearly knocking over a stack of boxes. The lid of the open box shifted, just a little, like whatever was inside was trying to push it off. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I ran. As I locked up the workshop and hurried out into the cold night air, my mind raced with questions I didn't want answers to. Something was wrong here, something I couldn't explain, and I wasn't sure I wanted to know the truth. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the boxes in the back room, the shiny red thing twitching inside. It wasn't my imagination. I knew what I'd seen, and yet the more I tried to make sense of it, the less it felt real. The next day, I debated whether to quit. I should have. I could have walked away right then and there, but something kept pulling me back. I couldn't explain it. Maybe it was the money. Maybe it was my curiosity. Or maybe it was something else entirely. Something I didn't want to admit. When I arrived at the workshop, everything looked normal, but it felt wrong. Holly greeted me with her usual smile, but her eyes darted around nervously, as if she were expecting something or someone. "We're a little short-staffed today," she said, her voice unusually calm, like she was trying to keep me from panicking. "Joe won't be joining us." "Why not?" I asked. She hesitated, just for a second, before replying, "He wasn't feeling well. That didn't sit right with me." Joe didn't seem like the type to call out sick, especially not this close to Christmas. But I didn't push it. I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. The day passed in a blur, the same routine as always. Kids sitting on Santa's lap, parents snapping pictures, Holly hovering nearby. But something was different. Santa was quieter than usual. He didn't crack as many jokes or give his usual hearty laugh. And then, halfway through the shift, the lights went out. Not just the workshop lights, the entire mall went dark. There was a collective gasp from the crowd, followed by the cries of children and the murmurs of confused parents. Holly rushed to the center of the workshop, clapping her hands to get everyone's attention. "Please stay calm," she said, her voice a little too loud, a little too forced. "This happens sometimes. It's just a power surge. The backup generators will kick in any minute." But they didn't. The workshop was bathed in shadows, the only light coming from the dim glow of the emergency exit signs. The air felt heavier, like the darkness itself was pressing down on us. "Stay here," Holly whispered to me, her usual cheerfulness gone. "I need to check something." She disappeared into the back room before I could stop her. I stood frozen, unsure what to do. The parents were getting restless, and some started leaving, dragging their kids with them. Santa remained in his chair, unmoving, his face hidden in the shadows of his costume. And then I heard it, the tapping sound again, but louder this time. It was coming from the back room. I glanced at Santa, hoping for some kind of reassurance, but he didn't move. He just sat there, staring straight ahead like a mannequin. "Holly?" I called out, my voice trembling. No response. I took a step toward the back room, my heart pounding in my chest. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, like something or someone was trying to get out. I pushed the door open slowly, the creak of the hinges echoing in the silence. The room was dark, but I could make out the shapes of the presents stacked on the shelves. They looked different now, less like decorations and more like containers. "Holly?" I whispered again, my voice barely audible. Something shifted in the shadows, and I froze. It wasn't Holly. It was tall, hunched over, and its outline didn't match anything human. My breath caught in my throat as the figure moved closer, the faint light catching on its shiny surface. I stumbled back, slamming the door shut before it could come any closer. My hands shook as I fumbled with the lock, turning it as fast as I could. When I turned around, Santa was standing right behind me. I screamed, stumbling backward into the wall. His face was still hidden under the brim of his hat, but I could feel his eyes on me, sharp and unblinking. "What's in there?" I demanded, my voice cracking. He didn't answer. He just tilted his head slightly, as if he were studying me. The tapping started again, louder this time, and the door behind me shook like something was pounding on it. "What the hell is going on?" I shouted, my fear turning into anger. Santa finally spoke, his voice low and cold. "You should have stayed out of it." Before I could respond, the door burst open, and the thing inside lunged out. It moved too fast for me to get a good look, but I felt its weight as it knocked me to the ground. Santa didn't move to help. He just stood there, watching as I scrambled to my feet, my mind racing. The creature, or whatever it was, disappeared into the shadows, its movement too smooth, too unnatural. Holly appeared then, her face pale and her eyes wide with terror. She grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the exit. "We have to leave," she said, her voice shaking. I didn't argue. As we ran through the darkened mall, I could hear the sound of something following us. It wasn't loud, just a faint, rhythmic tapping that seemed to echo from every direction. "What is that thing?" I gasped, barely able to keep up with Holly. She didn't answer. She just kept running, her grip on my arm tightening. When we finally burst through the mall doors and into the cold night air, the sound stopped. We stood there for a moment, panting and shaking, before Holly finally spoke. "You shouldn't have gone into the back room," she said quietly. I wanted to scream at her, demand answers, but the look on her face stopped me. She looked broken. "What was in there?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Holly shook her head. "It doesn't matter. You're done here. Don't come back." And with that, she turned and walked away, leaving me standing in the parking lot, alone and confused. I didn't go back to the mall. I didn't even think about picking up my paycheck. For days, I stayed in my tiny apartment, curtains drawn, trying to convince myself it was all some weird, elaborate misunderstanding. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe I'd imagined more than I realized. But deep down, I knew none of that was true. The thing that haunted me most wasn't the shadowy figure or the tapping sound. It wasn't even Santa's cold, detached stare as everything fell apart. It was the silence afterward. The way Holly walked away without looking back. The way she told me not to come back, like she already knew what would happen if I did. And that thing in the box, whatever it was, it didn't feel like the end. It felt like the beginning of something much worse. A few nights after I quit, I woke up to a sound outside my door. It was soft, barely audible, a rhythmic tapping, like fingers drumming against wood. I froze, my heart racing as I strained to listen. It was probably nothing, I told myself, just the building settling or a neighbor moving around. But then it came again. Tap, tap, tap. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. I haven't heard it since, but that doesn't mean it's gone. Every time I walk past a mall or hear a Christmas carol, my chest tightens. I can't look at Santa displays without my skin crawling. And when I hear kids laughing, there's always this little voice in the back of my mind, wondering if they're safe, if they're really safe. I don't have answers. I don't even know if I want them. But sometimes, late at night, I think about that back room, about the torn wrapping paper, the tapping sounds, and the thing that lunged at me in the dark. And I wonder if it's still there, or worse, if it ever left. Subscribe for more horror stories every day.